For today's video, I'm going to try my best to answer a question a lot of you all have been asking, and that question is how do you stun, stagger, knock down, slow, snare, and cause affliction? So I'm going to try my best to explain all of the different ways to cause these effects. And the first thing I should point out before we get started is that I haven't tested out all of these different methods. Obviously I don't have all of the heroes, and as for the heroes I do have, I don't have all of them leveled up yet. So I haven't tested out all of these different methods, but I still wanted to include them because supposedly they work as well. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that every type of husk has an impact bar. Regular husk and mini husk have a smaller impact bar compared to husky husk and smashers. And what I mean by impact bar is that you have to do a certain amount of impact before your perk triggers. So let's use the freeze trap for example. I'm sure most of you have noticed that when most husks walk across the freeze trap, they end up getting frozen. But sometimes when a smasher walks across that same freeze trap, it won't freeze them. And that's because that freeze trap didn't completely drain their impact bar. And that's why sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 freeze traps before it actually freezes the smasher. And the same thing is true for launchers as well. We'll go ahead and use that as another example. Sometimes you'll see a smasher walk past your first wall launcher and it doesn't launch them. But once they get to the second or third wall launcher, it usually launches them. And that's because the first wall launcher didn't completely drain the smasher's impact bar. So yeah, that's one thing I thought I should mention before we get started, because I will be mentioning the impact bar throughout this video. And the last thing I wanted to mention before we get started is that if there's any other ways to stun, stagger, slow, snare, knock down, or afflict targets that I don't mention, be sure to let us know in the comments below. Alright, so there's 3 main ways you can cause these different types of effects. One is through weapons and weapon perks. Another way is through traps and trap perks. And the third way is through hero abilities as well as hero squad bonuses. So first we're going to start off with weapons and weapon perks. In order to cause affliction with weapons, you're going to have to use a weapon that has a perk that causes affliction damage for 6 seconds. As you can see, we have that perk here on this grave digger. When it comes to slowed and snared targets, you're going to want to use a weapon that has a snare. So this snowball launcher has a water snare, which means that whenever you do damage with this weapon, it's going to snare the target by 30% for 6 seconds. Now when it comes to stun, stagger, and knock down, I know for a fact that all vacuum tube weapons can stun enemies. And one thing I should point out with the vacuum tube weapons is that the vacuum tube weapons that have more impact tend to stun the enemies more often than the weapons that don't. So yeah, I noticed that the vacuum tube rifle usually stuns the enemies more often than my vacuum tube sword. But yeah, all vacuum tube weapons can stun enemies, and you'll know they're stunned because you'll see these yellow stars circling around their head. And when it comes to staggering enemies, you're going to want to use a weapon that has high impact. One weapon that I know for sure that staggers enemies is the hydraulic pistols that came with the Mutant Storm event. I noticed that a lot of times, even when it comes to like blasters, if you shoot them with your hydraulic pistol, it'll end up staggering them for a second or two. So if you have a weapon that deals a lot of impact like the piston spitter or a sniper, you should be able to stagger enemies that way. If there's any other weapons that I didn't mention that can easily stagger enemies, let us know in the comments below. But those are a couple of the weapons that I know of as of right now. And when it comes to knocking down targets, you're going to want to use melee weapons that deliver high knockback, like the pulverizer. I believe rocket launchers can also knock down enemies as well. So with that being said, I believe any melee weapon or rocket launcher that has a large knockback can knock down targets. But yeah, I believe there's also a perk that increases your impact and knockback, which is also going to help you knock down targets as well. So yeah, to sum up the weapons, there's a perk that can cause affliction damage. There's a perk that can cause damage dealt with your weapon to snare the target. High impact weapons like the piston spitter and sniper rifles can stagger the target. And high knockback weapons like the pulverizer and dam buster can knock down targets. And all vacuum tube weapons stun targets. And next up, we're going to go over traps that can stun, stagger, knock down, and slow and snare. For those who don't know, the wall dynamos can stun enemies. If it doesn't kill them directly and exceeds the husk impact bar, usually it'll stun that husk for about a second. So yeah, the stun doesn't really last that long when it comes to wall dynamos, but they can stun targets. Now I believe another way you can stun enemies is with the ceiling zapper trap. I kind of feel like the Ceiling Zapper usually kills enemies before it has a chance to stun them. But if you look at the stats, you can see that it has a half second of stun time. So just like with the wall dynamos, if you do enough impact with your Ceiling Zappers, you should stun the husk for about a half a second. And the last way you can stun husk is by using wall lights. So yeah, those are the 3 different traps that can stun husk: the wall dynamos, the Ceiling Zappers, and the wall lights. The wall lights will probably be the best trap to use because it stuns them for longer. For the Ceiling Zapper and wall dynamos, it's only going to stun them for half a second. When it comes to knocking down targets, I believe launchers can knock down targets. Tire traps also have a chance to cause knockback as well. Like I said, it kind of depends on how much impact they do. If you're trying to slow and snare a target, I'd recommend that you use the wooden floor spikes because they damage and slow all enemies who are standing on the trap. I believe freeze traps count as a snare, and if you're trying to cause affliction with your traps, then you're going to want to use the ceiling gas trap because it creates an AoE cloud that will affect enemies with affliction damage over time. Alright, so now that we have the weapon perks and traps out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can cause all of these different effects with different hero abilities and squad bonuses. And first we're going to start off with Constructors, and I believe most Constructors have the Kinetic Overload perk, which is going to deal additional damage and knock back, and that usually triggers once every 6 seconds, and I believe that's going to help you knock down targets a little more consistently. Any Constructor that has the Bull Rush ability is also going to be able to knock down targets either at the end of their Bull Rush or when they collide with walls. The Tank Constructors have a perk called Nice and Slow, which is going to make your Kinetic Overload apply a 30% slow to affected targets, and that's going to last for 5 seconds. So that's one way you can slow and snare a target, is by playing with a Tank Constructor like Tank Penny. And one way you can cause affliction while playing as a Constructor is to have the Dragon Ninja in your tactical slot, because the Dragon Ninja has the Bloody Bull tactical squad bonus, which is going to make your Bull Rush afflict damage targets for 3 seconds. And another way you can cause affliction damage with Constructors is to use a Constructor that has the electrified floors like Machinist Harper, Base Kyle, Base Hype, Mega Base. And next up we're going to take a look at the Outlanders. And Vanguard Southie has a tactical squad bonus called Stun Baton, which is going to make your melee crit hits do increased impact, and it's going to add a 1.5 second of stun when the enemy is interrupted. And another way you can stun husk is by using the Shock Tower. For those who don't know, the Shock Tower can stun small enemies for 1 second, and it can also stun large enemies after multiple hits, or after it surpasses the impact bar. So those are a couple of different ways you can stun enemies using an Outlander. One way you can slow and snare a target is by putting the Lamurai or the Shrieking Master Ninja in your tactical slot, because that's going to allow your anti-material charge to slow enemy movement speed by 30% for 7 seconds. Another way you can slow enemies is to use an Outlander that has the Barricade perk, which is going to make the enemies damaged by your Teddy have their movement and attack speed slowed by 30% for 6 seconds. And as of right now, I only know of 2 Outlanders that have the Barricade perk, and that is the Enforcer Grizzly and Trailblaster AC, or Trailblaster Buzz. They're both the same thing. So yeah, that Barricade perk can slow enemies down as well. And as of right now, I believe there's a couple of different ways you can knock down enemies while playing as an Outlander. One is to have Electro Pulse Penny in your tactical slot. As of right now, I don't have Electro Pulse Penny, so I can't really show an example of her squad bonus. And another way you can knock down enemies is by having Sergeant Jonesy in your tactical slot, because he has the Phase Blast tactical squad bonus, which is going to make your phase shift cause a blast and knock enemies backwards. One way you can cause affliction with Outlanders is by playing with Fragment Flurry Jess, because she has the Static Cling perk, and I believe that allows your Shock Tower to do affliction damage. And yeah, that sums up all of the different ways you can trigger those effects while playing as an Outlander. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the ninjas. And for those who don't know, ninjas that have Crescent Kick can stun enemies for 3 seconds whenever you use your Crescent Kick. You can slow the husk with ninjas by using your Smoke Bomb, because the smoke cloud's going to last for 6 seconds and it's going to slow all enemies inside of it by 30%. Now if you're trying to cause affliction while playing as a ninja, then you may want to use a ninja that has corrosive stars like Deadly Blade Crash, because that's going to make your throwing stars afflict their targets. And another way I believe you can do affliction is with the Corrosive Blade perk, Obviously I haven't tested it out yet because I haven't unlocked all of her perks, but whenever you get crit hits with an edged weapon, it's going to deal damage over time and reduce movement speed by 30%. So I believe that Corrosive Blade not only afflicts targets, but it can also slow targets as well. I also believe that Guardian Bull, who's a Constructor, has a squad bonus that allows your Crescent Kick to cause affliction as well. And the last way you can cause affliction is by having a Deadly Blade Ninja in your tactical slot, because that's going to make your crit hits from melee weapons deal additional damage for 3 seconds. And it's also going to reduce movement speed, so it may also qualify as slowing the husk as well. And last but not least, I wanted to show all of the different ways you can trigger these effects while playing as a soldier. So for those who don't know, Special Forces Banshee has a tactical squad bonus called Flash Bang, which is going to allow your frag grenades to do increased impact damage, and when the impact bar is reached, it's going to stun the enemies for 2.5 seconds. So that's one way you can stun enemies while playing as a soldier. Put Special Forces Banshee in your tactical slot. I also believe that the Shockwave ability qualifies as knocking down targets because that knocks back enemies within a 1 tile range. One way you can slow husk while playing as a soldier is to have a soldier that has the Shock and All perk, like Snowstalker Jonesy, and that's going to allow your Shockwave to apply slow to damage targets for 4.5 seconds. And one way you can cause affliction while playing as a soldier is to put Plasma Specialist Isa in your tactical slot, because she has the Plasma Grenades tactical squad bonus, which is going to make your frag grenades afflict targets every half second for 3 seconds. And the last thing I wanted to go over were gadgets. Whenever you use your banner, it can knock down the surrounding enemies, and the Slow Field gadget obviously slows the enemies. So yeah, as of right now, that sums up all of the different ways that I know of to slow, snare, stun, stagger, knock down, and afflict targets. Again, I haven't tested all of these different methods out as of yet. Also, if there's any other ways you can trigger these effects, be sure to let us know in the comments below. And I believe that's going to do it for this one. I hope y'all found the video useful, and thanks for watching.